Hey, what's up? Just kind of wanted to go over today's like bullish news, seeing the CPI print being a little bit lower than expected. And so now people think the Federal Reserve is going to take their foot off the pedal or maybe even inflect or who knows. I just kind of think that it's interesting that like we still kind of operate in this economy or the market that like is just so like obviously, I mean, I don't want to say it's like centrally controlled because like, and obviously I was like super wrong about a lot of tons of stuff, especially like looking back at kind of, how like that narrative that people really had, I feel like probably in like the towards the end of like 2020 and like the majority of 2021, I think it was kind of funny that like, oh, the macro people on like Twitter and shit were like, oh man, like they're never going to be able to raise interest rates again because like without the influx of newly printed like M2 money supply or whatever, like, oh, shit's going to really hit the fan. And like, I do think that that is pretty funny. And like, I kind of did buy into that narrative a little bit too. And in hindsight, it is actually kind of fucking interesting because it does make me wonder how long the system can actually perpetuate like this whole like, and okay, system is such a vague term, but like the euro dollar system, I guess in general is kind of like showing America's really showing a strength here. So that's fascinating, but that's probably a topic for another day. Also, I was watching some of my old videos and that shit was fucking hilarious, especially like sometimes I see where my hair went. Like, okay, for those of you that saw like my hair go down to here, honestly, I think I probably should have stopped it like here-ish. Cause like once it got down to like here, it just looked weird. I think that was like too far, but definitely going to try to grow my hair back again. I do kind of miss it. God, it's just so funny. Like some of the shit I used to say. I mean, I can't believe I didn't get like Uber canceled. Like, I can't believe I ever got a job or wasn't like thrown in some sort of like, I don't know, that could not have been okay. Like the stuff I was saying, it was funny as hell. But anyways, the issue with the CPI that I just kind of really wanted to accentuate is that it is sort of like this year over year number, right? And you're basically tracking the rate of change over rate of change. So what you're kind of looking at is the acceleration of these prices, if you get what I'm saying, right? Because if you were just looking at the change, like the static change, that's kind of more like the velocity, like the long term, like like this first derivative, like, oh, where are we moving? But then like once you start like looking at the rate of change of a rate of change, like retroactively, like it's a backward facing like acceleration, right? So just because like we see that inflation is starting to decelerate or us accelerate, right? So the Federal Reserve is kind of playing, or like, I don't want to say the Federal Reserve, but we are kind of making like monetary decisions in general based off of like general accelerations rather than like actual inflections in the velocity. So like, even if we do have like this, like, inflation does continue to trend up, right? A lot of the numbers can be masked, and a lot of the issues with the CPI are kind of weird, right? I mean, not just like the basket of what actually is in the CPI. Like, go ahead and Google it. Like, you'll actually see like, oh, like there's a bunch of formulas, but if you like look super closely into the formulas, right, you have to ask yourself like, what are these baskets? What are the weighting of baskets? And like some people, maybe some academics, some scholars or something, or bankers or whoever looks at this shit will basically say like, oh, well, there's surveys, there's really good surveys done, or there's metrics, there's consumer metrics, there's commodity, economic, whatever data. Like, at the end of the day, it's relatively arbitrary, right? And you could also make the argument that like, where even are they getting this data, like Web2 endpoints? But well, it's a little conspiratorial and probably a little pseudo-intellectual on my part to a degree. But there are also a lot of like hedonic adjustments too, right? Like if they're like, oh well, hey, like the implied quality of whatever, maybe you look at it in terms of like, for hardware, maybe you look at something like CPU metrics or like transistor or whatever the fuck you want to look at. Or if you're looking at like food, you're like, oh, caloric values or nutritional values or something. And so you can make some sort of like adjustment being like, oh yeah, it's okay that like, hamburgers went up like 10% this year. It's okay because like the quality of the hamburger itself is like up like 10%. So there actually is no increase. I mean, obviously that's an extreme case and, it's a little straw manny on my end, but also the supplementary weightings are also kind of weird too, right? Because if you're, that's what you got to think about it. Like if your diet is comprised of like 50% hamburger and 50% hot dog, and hamburgers don't inflate at all, but hot dogs go up 10%. But then, the central planner, I don't want to say this in a that sounds so conspiratorial, but for the sake of just being like conspiratorial, I mean, it's kind of more fun to be conspiratorial anyway. So you're kind of just like, okay, like we can get the hot dogs and like we just get just eat less hot dogs. Like just don't eat any hot dogs and just eat twice as many hamburgers, we can make the argument that like, oh, the caloric value, like I was saying earlier, I think, oh, the calories are the same, or like, it still gets the same like B12, or I don't really know. I don't know jack shit about vitamin stuff, but like, like you can make that argument. And so you can basically like, well, if you just don't eat any hot dogs and you just eat, supplement it with hamburgers, and there is no inflation. And obviously these are like super, super, super extreme cases. And like, I'm not advocating that this is like what actually is going on, but I do think the overarching methodology is similar. Or at least it's somewhat in line. And I do think that it is kind of odd that, well, I don't know. I've always kind of deemed like people will debate like, oh, fascism or what is communism, or both left, far right ideologies, or maybe you just look at the government as like a 2D spectrum. I don't really know what you think of it, but I definitely think that there is an argument to be made that a type of government that is essentially kind of coercing it's the general populace, or just like whatever, to use a specific type of currency or accounting system in general. And controlling the monetary supply as well as controlling interest rates, I guess, which you could make the argument that that ties into debt instruments, because really that's what the interest rate is kind of talking about. And like some people will talk about that, that's basically just money, except like, a different temporal aspect of it. So, I mean, temporally adjusting like what is considered money. If you really think about money, money is just a measurement of resources, right? These resources are essentially the base level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So it's like food, it's like water, it's like shelter, it's like whatever. But anyways, yeah, also I did move into a new place. So I do live here now for at least the time being, a little Cleveland Brown action, if you know what I'm saying. But yeah, no, that's pretty much it. I do think that it is weird that we still are having that large of moves. I mean, I think it's kind of funny. And I still kind of do hold on to my overarching, like kind of, I don't want to say like my thesis, but just kind of a guess that I do think that we are probably going to see like the markets at least probably, and markets probably more like interest rate sensitive markets, but in general, like, that's just kind of the nature of the game. Whether or not some people have been asking me if I think that like commodity prices have kind of like hit their peak or if they're going to inflect or what's going to go on with that. Genuinely, I don't know. I think that there are a little like nuances to it. I mean, you could point to like supply chains, or you could probably do macro geopolitical stuff. And I don't really have a good explanation for that one way or the other. But regardless, I do think that it is kind of interesting. If I had to assume, I think honestly it would probably fluctuate with just exchange rates more than anything. As that might, kind of belie some like economic activity information. I don't know. But that'd probably be my 2 cents. And again, when you are looking at these like year over year numbers, specifically like the CPI, right? Like you are looking at the rate of change of a rate of change, which I do think it is very important that we remember that when you are looking at these CPI changes, you are not looking at the velocity. It is mostly the acceleration, right? Especially because you have to think about the rate of change of a rate of change, right? So incredibly misleading. However, I do think that at this point, you're basically saying like, oh yeah, I don't like the way that like we're looking at these inflections, but but the underlying calculation of it is just kind of a suspect in general, based off of what I was saying earlier. But if I had to pull out of my ass, I don't think that this rally is probably going to be like super sustained. I mean, obviously, it'd be funny if it is, and it'd be kind of good just as someone that is long these assets in general. But yeah, it is kind of like just trying to think if there is anything other random stuff at this point. I'm back to just rambling. No, but dude, watching some of those old videos is fucking hilarious. Like some of the shit that I used to say. It's also funny to watch the progression of my hair. At this point, I'm really just talking to myself. But the whole time, I guess I've kind of just really just been talking to myself. All of these lights, I don't really know what to make of it. Some people that have been in my room have told me that like these lights are kind of like weird. To be fair, like I don't have any other decorations except from when I was like in college, but I guess I haven't really updated my wardrobe or like any of my actual stuff since then, just because like I have been moving around. Also, I just don't see the purpose of like it works. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just trying to justify. Am I just trying to justify myself? What am I even saying right now at this point? Yeah, I guess that kind of is the nuts and bolts of sort of what's going on, I guess, in general. But yeah, all right, that's basically it. So I guess till next time.